Hi, everybody. This is Natalie, Carey, and Melissa Duran from Red Liberty Media. We're here sitting down with Ana Paulina Luna, congressional candidate from Florida. Ana Paulina, thank you so much for being with us today.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to be with you ladies today.
How is life as a congressional candidate? What is a day in the life like?
I would have to say a majority of it from the behind the scenes part, it can sometimes look glamorous, but it's really not. I'd say a majority of the time you're fundraising. Most of my day is either consisting of that. I like write hundreds of thank you notes a week and then also to voter contact and interaction. But as we know, as we shift and we push towards the election season, which is now, it's usually the 4 months before an election, that's when it really gets sporty. And so it's so bizarre to me because in politics, it's socially acceptable to smear your opponent. And so I'm actually up 56% in the polls. And so I'm obviously the number one candidate. I'm endorsed by President Trump for this Republican primary, and this is an open Republican seat. And so you can imagine they call it front runner treatment, but that basically just means you get smeared the entire time. So
Oh,
Oh, no.
but
Wow.
that's the type of politics though that I think people don't understand the behind the scenes, and then also too, you're interacting with other members of Congress. There's a huge focus on doing community engagement and events, and basically meeting as many voters as you can. So I'd say on average it's about an 18-hour day. And then what's unique about my platform versus most candidates running for office is I have a very big social media that I actually run myself.
mm,
And so then I take the time
oh.
at the end of the day and I'm interacting with voters there as well. So it's a 24/7 job.
Okay, so you were
Yeah.
born and raised in Southern California. I actually live in Los Angeles. What part of SoCal are you from?
So I actually went to high school in West Los Angeles. So off of Venice Boulevard. And I always tell people, LA, even 10, 15 years ago, which is basically when I was there, it is so much different than it is today. I mean, I remember I went to actually six high schools. And they were busing in kids from different parts of LA. And like back then, LA had a really big problem with gangs. And so it still is an issue. But I'm sure you guys know this. I've always talked about my upbringing and then my time in the
Hmm.
service and really how that affects my decisions, especially with legislation. I many times talk from a place of experience. I didn't just read it in a book somewhere. And so this race, as much as we're focused on local issues, there's still those national issues, and people like me that have experienced poor policy understand what happens as a direct result of that. So I'm not afraid of telling my story.
So, how did you go from living in Southern California to now running for Congress in my state of Florida? How did that happen?
So I actually joined the military when I was 19 years old, and I knew I wanted to go to school. I didn't really have a way of paying for it, so I enlisted in the military. And ultimately, because of that, I actually ended up getting stationed in Florida back in, I believe it was
Mm.
2011. Yeah, no, 2010. I got married. So yeah, around 2010, 2011. And once I got stationed in Florida, I really just kind of fell in love with it and I never left. I actually went to college out here as well. But it's interesting because when
Hmm.
you talk about politics, what's unique about our state is there's so many people now coming from places like California and New York that are fleeing
Hmm.
poor policy. And so, as much as I'd like to, say I fled, California, I didn't. It was kudos to the military, and honestly, it's been one of the greatest decisions that I could have made. Was not leaving this state because, as you can see, we are leading the country, especially in conservative politics.
At what point did you say, I want to run for Congress?
I would say it was probably a couple months into my job working with Turning Point USA. I part of my job
Hmm.
with Turning Point was doing conservative commentating, and I absolutely believe
Hmm.
that there is a space for that and that it is effective. But when I kept wanting to talk on immigration and talk about human trafficking and what was happening at the border, I noticed that the producers, depending on the network, like the conservative networks were more or less fine, but it was the larger mainstream conservative networks that didn't necessarily want me to even address that issue. They were wanting me to talk on other issues that were more or less just clickbaity topics. They didn't actually have solutions. And what I realized is that regardless of the network, regardless of the ideology, that people on the networks, the commentators, were talking about what people in Washington, D.C. were doing. And so if I wanted to help change the national discussion, I had to run for Congress in order to do it. To be clear, I had never experienced someone that had run for office. I was basically, in my immediate family, the only person that had ever gotten politically vocal or involved. And mind you, this was, I think, at the beginning of 2016, so previous to the election, where it was still like not as polarized as it was when I then joined Turning Point and then got politically active. And so for me, it was more or less a learning experience, but then also too, I felt really convicted that, I could talk about the problem and I could complain about it, but I felt that I still wasn't doing enough to fix it. And so I felt that the only way to actually do that was to run. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today.
So I've seen you post about Biden's new disinformation governance board, and especially as it pertains to the Hispanic community. Um, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
So here's the deal with the Democrat Party platform and the Republican Party platform. In 2016, the Democrats had the same viewpoints that Republicans did on immigration and border security. There's actually a very famous clip that I recommend you guys post on your social media to share with your followers or with this interview, but it's of Barack Obama saying, "Look, don't come here. You're going to get hurt in the process." And then it's very commonly known, at least within the Hispanic demographic, that Barack Obama was known as the deporter in chief and Biden was
Mm-hmm.
his VP at the time. So what you had happen is in 2016 you started to see this shift with the Hispanic demographic becoming the largest voting minority in the country, and that increased, and that's from pewhispanic.org. Now in 2020 we are the largest voting minority in the country, specifically that which is the Mexican American descent. And so when you saw this shift on immigration, I believe they shifted those pivotal talking points because they were trying to get those voters. Now, the problem that the Democrats are having is that they didn't realize that because Hispanic Americans and even first, second generation Hispanics are inherently conservative, because many of us were raised Catholic, I was raised Catholic on my mom's side, or Christian, that our value system more closely aligns with that of the Republican Party platform, which is conservative. And so now you
Hmm.
have MSNBC, who literally sent down a film crew to interview me as well as other Hispanic candidates and then Hispanic activists across the country to figure out this anomaly of why Hispanics are voting in droves in favor of the Republican Party platform. It's interesting that with the lifting of Title 42, this documentary from MSNBC is dropping, but then also too, you had Joe Biden announce his basically Ministry of Truth, where Mayorkas has stated that they are targeting disinformation in the Hispanic demographic and in Spanish. To me, that's scary because if you look at
Mm-hmm.
what the State Department puts out, there is an issue with human trafficking. If you talk to any Border Patrol or law enforcement, they will tell you that drug running, human trafficking, and labor trafficking is a huge issue because of our open borders. But the problem is that many people don't see past those leftist control headlines, and when conservatives like myself or maybe both of you go and post about it, if you have a larger microphone, they will suppress you. And I know this is kind of a long-winded response for your question, but if you look at what happened with recently how Elon Musk was talking about purchasing Twitter, I, as well as many other conservatives with larger profiles, became unshadow banned. And within 48 hours of Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, my official campaign account was verified on Twitter, which is a huge deal because for 2 years, not only did I sue the FEC to enforce election law with Twitter, but they were actively suppressing candidates around the country because they didn't like what we were saying, especially minority candidates. And so it's very important that people are tracking what the administration is doing because they are weaponizing with our own tax dollars government agencies in order to suppress true information.
How did that lawsuit go, and what prompted you to file that lawsuit?
So I filed the lawsuit because I was actively witnessing on a regular basis Twitter suppressing my campaign and platform. And actually, what finally was the last straw is I had someone write my campaign that said that they had been scammed by someone that was posing as my campaign account on Twitter. I think they were requesting Google Play cards, and this person wasn't even in the country. Okay, the person that was pretending to be me was saying that they were in Libya and they were working for the State Department. Like clearly, it wasn't me. But the point is that people were falling for it. So not only do you have people that are getting scammed that are trying to donate to my campaign, but then also too, I was the only congressional candidate in my race that wasn't verified of all Democrats and Republicans, and so you had them actively engaging in algorithm suppression. So at the time, I had around 200 and or no, I had around 300,000 followers or 350,000 followers on my Twitter account, and I was getting maybe 0.5% engagement, or people would post things, I'd see the likes go up and then it would drop back down. And actually, when I spoke with President Trump about social media, he had actually said that he had also witnessed on a number of occasions, one, he couldn't go over a certain amount with engagement for followers, but also two, his stuff was being suppressed. And so I did it because there were so many people that were trying from different angles to take on big tech and Twitter. We felt that this was going to be a really good, solid argument because there's something called an in kind contribution to a campaign. That means that if a company, an organization, they donate something, right? It has to be documented because technically it's helping the candidacy, and so it has to be filed basically with campaign finance law. And ultimately, the outcome of the lawsuit was the FEC, through a Biden appointed Democrat appointee, said that it was not their job to enforce election law. So that's the first problem. You have the FEC, whose sole job, is to enforce election law. They were saying that they weren't going
Yeah.
to do it. And two, they said that because congressional laws covering down on engagement for media are outdated, that they only cover down on print, television, and newspaper, or print, television, and radio, that they did not have to force Twitter to follow
Um,
campaign law because Twitter was not considered a public utility like those other platforms are. Now we know that clearly they were suppressing information. Elon Musk pointed it out. I'm not the only person now. Since we filed the lawsuit, obviously President Trump has been deplatformed, but he's not the only person. There's other candidates around the country that were actively suppressed. The point is, though, is that because of the fact that some members of Congress don't understand social media, they can't rewrite and update the law. And then the other problem with that is that you have tech companies who have lobbyists that even give to Republican members so that they don't change the election law. So we have to update this, but it has to be done from within our own party because they're suppressing us, and it's not just stopping with us. We're now seeing that big tech is also going after their own. And so that's something that's scaring a lot of people. And I think Joe Rogan was probably just the tip of the iceberg in regards to how they are leveraging their control in big tech as well as these internet platforms.
So how do you plan on tackling that if you make it to Congress?
The first thing is that I'm already making friends with representatives that I believe would help co-sponsor bills. As we know, Congress is, you have to be able to get things done, right? So I am absolutely, one, making friends with the right people, but also two, I'm not taking special interest money that's going to help big tech at all by any means. And I
mm,
think that that's really important because you have people that will go up there and they're bought out and paid for by special interest by the time they get in, and that's why you'll see that switch where someone says one thing on the campaign trail and then when they get elected to office they don't do anything.
mhm.
But another thing is that I actually understand the issues not just from a political perspective, but I actually understand the tech behind it. And so I understand how I could write that legislation. But again, if we don't take back the House with the correct candidates, if we don't take back the Senate with the correct candidates, all we're going to do is continue to go in this circle. And
Yeah.
it's a good reminder to people that the founding fathers never anticipated for people to professionally legislate. Okay, you're supposed to go there, go back home. And so I
Mhm.
can tell, especially for young women who want to get involved in politics, I really encourage women, especially, to get involved because of all, 430 plus members of Congress, you have a very small demographic that are women, and a very small number of women are conservative women in Congress. And I
Yeah.
think in order to help share this message, as well as to stand up the younger generation, we have to get more women involved.
You mentioned in the beginning that you did get endorsed by President Trump
Yes.
and you've been at Mar-a-Lago. What was that like for you?
So my endorsement process was rather extensive. Not only was I endorsed last election cycle, so in 2020, for those who might not know how it works with the cycles, I was actually running in a D+2 seat. So that means it was a Democrat leaning seat. This election
Mhm.
cycle, I'm running in an R seat. So we redistricted. Governor DeSantis
Mhm.
weighed in on that, and this is now an open red seat, and not just a little bit red, it's a very red seat. So last election cycle, after I won the primary nomination and I ran against a Democrat, I was fully endorsed by President Trump. This election cycle, President Trump weighed in and looked at the other candidates, to include new candidates who have jumped in, and
Mhm.
chose to endorse me because I am literally vetted as the true conservative, but also to someone that won't jeopardize the America First agenda and push a pro
Mhm.
Chinese agenda here. And that's again something that we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. So the endorsement process in itself was extremely intense. They went through everything, my social media, my background,
Wow.
just basically who I am as a candidate, whether or not I was a viable candidate, meaning could I actually win a race, which I proved that I have. They go into the finances of your team, everything. And then it's ultimately up to the president on whether or not he's going to endorse you. So I remember I walked in and I basically had I want to say a 45-minute to 1 hour meeting with him. And the first thing I thought of is I can't believe, one, that, someone from my background is ultimately, I was in the military, but I had a rough
Mhm.
upbringing, rough start at life. But only in
Wow.
America can you really work through all of that, and through hard work find yourself in front of the man that literally brokered peace with North Korea and is
Wow.
responsible for the Abraham Accords. I mean, he did some incredible stuff, and it was honestly an honor to be standing in front of him and to
Mhm.
sit down and have a one-on-one conversation, and for him to actually ask me my opinions on things like big tech and Florida elections and really the outcome of what's happening in this country, especially with the Hispanic demographic. So I'm very honored to
Mhm.
have had that experience. It was very stressful at the time because obviously, it's President Trump, and that's a lot of pressure. But mainly it was excited pressure because I was in front of someone that I really
Mhm.
admired. So it went well though, and he endorsed me.
Wow.
And I can say that he doesn't always endorse people that come to his office seeking those endorsements. In fact, I know a few people that didn't get those endorsements, but I'm very honored to have his. And as you
Wow.
know, his endorsement is huge for elections, and so we're excited to bring home the win this August
Mhm.
23rd.
So tell
So,
our viewers, how much of Florida does your district cover?
So each congressional district has roughly about 700,000 constituents, but specifically the geographical location of my district is actually west of Tampa. And so there's Tampa Bay area, and I'm in a county called Pinellas County. I'd say it's about 25 minutes from the heart of Tampa, or MacDill Air Force Base, if you know where that's at. And so my district goes from the west side of St. Pete all the way up to Tarpon Springs, and we have a predominantly beach community, which is amazing for us. That's actually why a lot of people from New York and California are moving down here. But it is a really beautiful
Mhm.
area, and I'm proud to say that one of the unique things about my campaign and platform, and who I am as not just a person but as a candidate, is that I really, really care about ocean health and safety. And so we've really been active with different coral reef restoration nonprofits. I believe that part of being a conservative is conserving the environment, but within reason, to where you're not destroying business. And I don't believe that we're all going to die
Mhm.
in 20 years from cow farts. And so I have a very realistic approach to environmental conservation.
how do you go from being low income? I know you came from a single mother family to, yeah, running for Congress and
Yeah.
having President Trump's endorsement.
Mhm.
And what do you attribute your success
I
to?
think it's really just hard work. I didn't ever think of myself as a victim. I didn't ever look for handouts.
Mhm.
I joined the military at 19 years old, which is one of the best decisions that I ever could have done. And it was through the military that I had a lot of structure. I put myself through college. I didn't take out student loans. From there, I worked really, really hard at Turning Point. I worked hard with PragerU. I've since written a book that I'm a published author with. It's actually called Bringing Them Home. So you can get that at Barnes and Noble, which I was actually really excited about that because I never thought I'd be a published author, but here I am. And then later on, I realized that, when you find that one thing that you're passionate about, your work isn't necessarily work anymore. And so I found that because I'm doing the one thing that I am very passionate about, that I can do a lot of things and I don't ever feel tired or get bored of it. And so I have a podcast as well, and it's been very good, but I attribute all of that to, as long as you work hard for it, you have moral convictions about it. You don't have to step on people to get to the top. Just work hard, focus on your own
Mm-hmm.
messaging, focus on helping other people. And I think collectively you will find that in the end, there's big rewards for that.
Okay, I know you also said that you aren't taking special interest money from big tech. And you've also decided not to accept donations from big pharma. Is that in response to COVID and how that was handled, or do you have a passion about big pharma's involvement in politics, like from even
I
before
think in
COVID?
general, the one thing, and remember, I was on track to go to medical school, right? So I saw how things kind of worked with application processes when I was
Mm-hmm.
in the hospital doing my volunteer hours, etc. But the one thing that I've always found is that, especially when it comes to what is best for people, I found that with pharmaceuticals, especially historically speaking, there have been things that were authorized and then we later on found out 10, 15 years later it really hurt people. And so I believe that, especially with the response to COVID 19 and how people lost faith in representation, or you saw certain representatives really taking away from people's personal freedoms in the name of safety, and how what you saw that they're pushing didn't necessarily align with what I believe a constitutional conservative should be pushing. What I found is that I did not want to be a part of that problem, and I wanted people to know that I was really serious about that angle and perspective. And so to date, I've still not taken pharmaceutical money, and I won't. And that is because I believe that I am only held accountable to the people in my community, not people and big business in Washington, D.C., and I will hold true to that.
You've told us about so much that you've done and that you do, you know, your book, a podcast, you're traveling. How do you balance all of that for people trying to figure out how to balance so much? How do you do it?
So when I was in the military, one of my jobs was airfield management coordination. So I actually did a ton of coordinating. I can tell you that one thing that I do is I'll do campaign calls and thank you notes. But in regards to my personal life, and I've actually been together with my husband now for 12 years. He's very supportive of the campaign. He's a military vet. He actually just got out in December. But ultimately, he's been very much so a part of the campaign and understands what we have at stake here. And he also realizes that you can only do this at one point in your life, right? Like, I can tell you, when I'm 60 years old, I want to be nowhere near politics. I don't understand how people will be involved in politics for like 20, 30, 40 years. When you deal with the amount of tax that you do, and then also, too, I'm in one of the most beautiful parts of the country. Why would I want to go schlep it in Washington, D.C., you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I balance it by staying, one, organized, and then two, going back to what I'm passionate about. I'm constantly following the news cycle. I agree, I don't agree. I'm open for exchange of ideas, right? The one thing that I find is that because that coincides with my podcast or what I'm writing about or my social media or the campaign, it doesn't really feel like work to me. So going back to kind of following what your passions are, especially for younger people that might be in college that are listening to this podcast or looking about getting into the
Mm-hmm.
workforce, find something that you're good at, right? Like, everyone has a unique set of gifts that I think God gives you, whether it's writing, whether it's producing, whether it's blogging, whether it's, being a host for something, whether it's being a grassroots activist and organizing, but find your gift and then follow that, and you'll find that the right doors will open and the wrong ones will close. And then don't question it, just go for it. You're young once, don't do anything illegal, keep your nose to the grindstone, and you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. It's so good for us, girls trying to do this and that in social media, and it's a lot.
It
So
is
I just wanted to ask how you
it
do
is
it.
a lot, and I will tell you this too, for younger women. I went to six high schools. I know sometimes young women can be not nice to each other, but just stay
Mm-hmm.
focused. You will find that there's other really cool women that you'll meet in politics, especially conservative women. And if someone
Mm-hmm.
doesn't like you, someone's talking about you, who cares? Just keep it moving, focus on your own messaging, and that's really the recipe to success. It is so true that small-minded people will talk about other people, but if you really want to make a difference, you're focusing on literally like international policy or running, you're going to find that your circle that you keep around you will change, and hang out with people that you admire, that inspire you to do those things. And that's really how you're going to continue
Mhm.
to keep your message moving, to keep bettering yourself, but then also to ensure that you're not getting distracted with all of this.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, it's so good.
So, Anna, we want to know what's in store for you. Are you thinking of maybe starting a family or one day running for vice or president? What do you have in mind?
I can tell you that, when you first get into politics, especially as a candidate, that some people will ask you, well, what's your 10-year plan or what's your 20-year plan? Well, my 20-year plan is to not be in
Mhm.
politics. My 20-year plan is to be retired somewhere with, dwarf
Mhm.
goats and a horse somewhere, right? I do obviously want a family, but as you guys know, when you're pregnant, stress hormones can coat the baby's brain and it's not exactly good for the baby. So I don't
Mhm.
obviously,
Mm.
you know, I'm not trying to force that along right now just because I don't want to hurt any potential future children. But it is something that I anticipate on doing soon. And actually, um, there seems to be this misconception that you can't work and have a family. You absolutely can. You can also be a stay-at-home mom. That's cool too. But I already talked to Andy,
Mhm.
my husband, about it, and he knows that when it comes time to have kids, that he's going to be there, that I'm going to be there. We're both going to be a team in that effort, and that's why it's so important that, especially if you are looking at getting into politics, that you have a supportive spouse that's there with you, and that you guys are a team effort in all of it, because it really does help keep your marriage together. And then also too, it's better for your political ambitions. But I haven't really thought about, vice president or anything higher. I am for term limits. I can tell you that I've seriously been asked whether I consider running as someone's vice president, but I won't say who it was with. And ultimately, I'm just kind of focusing on those 50-meter targets, right? I'm focusing on my
Mhm.
primary election and then the general election. But I do plan for the future, and I can tell you that I will give everything that I have to this job and to this country for the next couple of years. But when it comes time for me to retire, I will be nowhere near politics. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And you just
Well,
have to make sure that you're,
Yeah.
remembering to love yourself, but also love your family and ensure that they don't feel like they're being neglected also.
well, thank you so much, Anna Paulina.
Mhm.
We're so grateful for your time and to talk with you. It was just so enjoyable,
Mhm.
and yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so
absolutely. I
much.
hope you guys
We
have
hope to
fun at
talk to
Young
you
Women's
again.
Leadership Summit. Turning Point's amazing. Turning Point Action just endorsed me, but they are absolutely incredible. Stay involved with them. And
Mhm.
for you guys, if anyone listening to this wants to find out more information about my campaign, you could head to voteapl.com. And if you guys want to get involved for door knocking or interning, I know some college courses do that from time to time. Please feel free to send us an email at noah@voteapl.com, and we'd love to have you on board.
All
Perfect.
right.
Thank you so much,
Take
Anna
care, guys. We'll talk
Paulina.
Well,
soon.